This time it's 5 classic Hondas from the 1970s. The 1970s was very much a mixed bag of fortunes for Honda. They started the decade really on top of the game, but then tended to pitch and roll and stagnated in periods while they spent a lot of money trying to develop their car side of the business. But they would produce some excellent machines. So here are 5 of their best. The Honda CB400-4. Honda's original CB400F was introduced in 1975 and was essentially an enlarged version of the CB350 model, sold primarily in the US market. And in Europe at least, the bike was initially quite popular, as it was seen as a lighter, nimble and more importantly much cheaper version of those big Honda 4s. Little transverse 408cc single overhead cam engine claimed 37 horsepower for a top speed of just over 100 miles an hour. In Great Britain in particular, the bike achieved something of a cult following, but unfortunately the little bike was much less popular in the key American market, where its lack of torque was really seen as a problem compared to its competitors. As a result, the machine ended production in 1977 after just 3 years, being replaced by a parallel twin machine which was simpler and importantly much cheaper to mass produce. The Goldwing. Honda's original Goldwing, the GL1000, arrived in 1975 in the US and European markets. It of course has that famous flat 4 engine, later replaced by a 6-cylinder in the 80s and 90s, with shaft drive, and that clever dummy tank which doubled up as a storage compartment. The real fuel tank of course is under the seat. The bike weighed in at a fairly hefty 265 kilos or 584 pounds, so clearly was aimed very much at the American market, where its smooth 80 horsepower engine and comfortable all-day riding position made it an ideal proposition for anybody that was going to tour cross country. Despite its complex appearance, the shaft drive and the single overhead cam motor were surprisingly easy to maintain, and although heavy, the weight was carried very low, so at speed the machine was surprisingly nimble, although not so much of course at low speed manoeuvres. The bike would continue into the early 80s, being replaced by the 1100, the first bikes to be built in the USA. The Honda Super Dream. Introduced in 1978, Honda's 400 and 250cc Super Dream models replaced the earlier Dream. This had slightly frumpy styling. Although the bike would be popular in the United States, it really didn't carry over very well in Europe. Although the new Super Dream models cleverly resembled the new CB750 and 900 direct overhead cam machines released at the same time. Although of course the Super Dreams themselves were much less complicated, being single overhead cam parallel twin air-cooled machines, although they did have clever 3-valve per cylinder heads. At the bottom of the engine there were 2 balance shafts to smooth out the vibrations, and there was CDI electronic ignition fitted too. The Super Dream was a comfortable all-rounder, which is very much capable of touring if the need arose. The 250 engine was 27 horsepower and the 400 made 43. The only downside with these machines is that they are pretty chunky, both weighing in around the 170 kilo mark. So while not the fastest, they can make a really good late 70s and early 80s classic. The Honda CB750. Honda's CB750 really took the world by storm when it was introduced in 1969. It's often described as the first superbike, although I think this is something of an exaggeration when you consider it was never actually the fastest bike in the world, even during the time of its production. And although Honda would claim 67 horsepower on release, somewhere in the late to mid 50s is actually nearer the mark. The bike is however a very sophisticated bit of kit, and although not quite the first 4-cylinder superbike onto the market, it was definitely the first time that one was more affordable and could be in the hands of the average punter. Add to that 5-speed gearbox, electric start and disc brakes right from the beginning, and it's easy to see why the bike was so popular, even if in reality those early disc brakes were really nothing to write home about, especially in the wet. But Honda got an awful lot right with the CB750, and they didn't really try to break new ground in too many areas. The engine uses traditional dry sump lubrication, and with the exception of those striking 4 exhausts sticking out the back, the styling is actually pretty conservative. This was a smart move because the more strikingly styled bikes from BSA and Triumph were not universally popular, especially in terms of that styling, so they had to quickly redevelop a more conservatively styled version for the US market in particular. But by then, of course, the Honda had pretty much grabbed market share and it was all over. But of course, Honda's time in the sun was surprisingly short-lived, with the Kawasaki Z1 arriving with an even more sophisticated engine just a few years later. Honda would react fairly slowly. They'd introduced the F2, which was an upgraded version of the earlier model, but in reality by the mid-70s, Honda's single overhead cam motor was beginning to fall behind. But with the company concentrating its finances and efforts into the production of cars, the classic CB would have to wait until the end of the 70s before its dual overhead cam replacement would finally arrive. The Honda CBX 1000. Honda's CBX is probably an example of Honda doing something just because they can, well, because they're Honda. The original 6-cylinder bike had been a 250 Grand Prix race from the 1960s, and using that as inspiration, they would develop a 6-cylinder 1047cc road bike in 1978. The massive engine would produce a claimed 105 horsepower at 9,000 RPM, good enough for a top speed of just over 130 miles an hour, if you could hang on, of course, because the early models didn't have a fairing. Cleverly, Honda would disguise some of that bulk by moving the alternator to behind the cylinders rather than at the end of the crankshaft. This would mean the engine was only 2 inches wider than the CB750, so although ground clearance and steering was surprisingly good, the bike still looked very bulky, with that huge cylinder block of its 24 valves and 6 exhausts really dominating proceedings. But of course a big problem for the Honda was that it was expensive to manufacture, and even more problematically, Honda would follow it up with its new direct overhead cam 4-cylinder bikes of 750 and 900 cc's. The 900 in particular was lighter, more nimble, and pretty much as quick as the 6-cylinder bike, and an awful lot cheaper too. But while the 6-cylinder was likely the better bike, it was also a fair bit more expensive and was out of many riders' price brackets, and so was by Honda standards at least not a sales success. Honda would redesign the bike with a fairing, a monoshock chassis and a mild detune in 1981 to refashion the bike as a sports tourer, but sales would remain disappointing, and the following year in 1982 would see an end to production of the CB1000X after just 4 years. And somewhat ironically, given the prices the bikes fetch today, the machines were being offered at a knockdown price in that time because they simply couldn't shift them. Things have changed a great deal for the CBX. What bikes or collections of bikes would you like to see us cover in future videos? Maybe got a bike we can use for a test ride. Either way, get in touch. Hope you enjoyed that video. If you did, don't forget to like and subscribe, and of course, thank you very much for watching.